Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Kotazo Moretlo from TelmarHelixa, and I'm very delighted to welcome you today on our updated BrandMapp webinar. In its 12th year, BrandMapp continues to provide us with powerful insights into the South African consumer market. I'm very excited and very confident that today's session will be an hour well spent that is packed with a lot of insights. Brandon de Kock, who is the Director of Storytelling at Y5, will then take us through some of the big changes in the consumer market. With that being said, please help me welcome Brandon de Kock. Hi, Brandon. How are you doing?
Hi, Monica. So I'm very good. Thanks for having me again, and thanks to everyone who's joining us out there in the broader Telmar family.
Thanks.
So yeah, let me leap straight in. We've got about an hour. Hopefully, I'll be able to get through most of what we've got to get through in that time. And just a reminder to everybody, I think if you do have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Obviously, we can't. My team is on standby to answer anything as it comes along. But let me jump straight in. Guys, we've those of you who've seen some of our webinars before will know that the work we do tries to understand the sort of South African consumer landscape. A very specific piece of it, which I'll tell you in a moment. But it feels like we've been on a roller coaster ride here. South Africa is hard enough. Global events make things even more interesting. And I don't know how you guys all feel, but like for me, I'm not sure which one of these people on the roller coaster I feel more like this year. I think the guy in the back right hand there is sort of more like, haven't been terrified, but I've been a little bit scared. The lady in the back left is having a really tough time. But the reality of this picture, what I'm trying to show is first of all, there's a distinct possibility the way Cape Town's expanding that we might actually have a roller coaster on top of Lion's Head quite soon. But that's by the by. It's this idea that I think there are people who've been doing okay and people who've been doing not so okay in the last year. And for those of us who are marketing goods and services to the broader consumer community, it's kind of important to know, where everything stands. So let's start at the normal beginning of the story. Just to remind everybody that, this is what we traditionally believe South Africa looks like. It's an averaged out picture. We think there are about 44 million adults in South Africa right now. That's the best guess that anybody has. That's adults over the age of 18. The 3.7 trillion rand a year that we earn, that comes from Mr. Kieswetter and the Treasury Department. It's a pretty accurate figure, we would think. And the challenge that we have as a country and as marketers and brand owners and people using the Telmar tool with all of its wonderful new little add-ons and AI things, we need to understand what the market is that we're trying to paint pictures of. This is the best picture we can paint for you as an overall. When you take those 44 million adults and you break them up by household income, this is kind of what South Africa looks like. So 70% of adults in South Africa live in households earning less than 10,000 rand a month. That's the mass market. If you're selling sort of very basic goods and services and products, that's a very important piece of the market. Then you've got this group of about 10 million adults sitting in what we traditionally call the mid-market. Those are people living in households earning 10 to 40. The 10 is important because it's the beginning of the taxpayer bracket. So effectively, the moment you get into the blue piece of this pyramid, you're starting to pay tax. And then right at the top, we've got a group of about 5% of adults in South Africa living in households earning 40,000 rand a month or more. That traditionally, we've called those people the top enders. They're the ones with real kind of consumer choice. They've got cash not to burn, but they've got cash to spend. They're earning and they're doing sort of all right. And very importantly, especially if people join late and make comments in the chat box, it's very important that everything that I'm about to show you comes out of the work we do in BrandMapp. And BrandMapp is only looking at the top two pieces of this pyramid. So it's other people's job to understand the true mass market of South Africa. We're not saying it's not important. It's just that when it comes to sort of premium goods and services and products and things like the automotive market and financial services, that's in the top 30% here. So this is a group of 14 million adults in South Africa. This is what we call them, the consumer class. Doesn't mean the others aren't consumer. It's a technical term, comes out of an American study done a few years ago. So this is what I'm about to show you is what has happened and what is happening in the top piece of this triangle. As I've said, those of you who are BrandMapp users and access the data on the Telmar tool, you'll know that there's huge amounts of information that sits in. We've got a whole lot of really cool stuff this year. We've added a bunch of new metrics, and obviously we try to keep things as similar as possible so that you can trend data. But we have added a whole bunch of new things which you can discover, and we'll be doing webinars and things to show users what cool stuff sits in it. For now, I'm just going to give you a really big overview of what's going on. So the big question is what actually really happened last year, and what are the things that we think are influencing some of the bigger trends that we see in the data year on year. Well, what happened last year? It was an interesting year. To start off with, the economy grew by 1.3%, guys. It's like stagnation is a compliment to an economy that's growing at 1.3%. To put that in perspective, Donald Trump, bless him, he's single-handedly tried to destroy the American economy, and it still grew at twice that, 2.6%. So our 1.3% is really not great growth. And then allied to that, obviously, is job creation. The unemployment rates of the youth, it's hectic. And there were no real jobs created in the formal economy that we can see. If they were created, they were below that 10K line. They were in the 70%, which is good news, but it's not great news from a sort of a bigger economical perspective. So 1.3 total growth. The average consumer price index was 3.2%, which is actually interesting because it's slightly lower than the last couple of years. So technically, we should have done sort of all right. Here's the point about the BrandMapp work that we do. You would hope that the consumer class grows at least that rate, okay? Because it means that at least the amount of money that people are earning is keeping pace with CPI. And that didn't happen. So for the first time since COVID, we see the total consumer class growing at a slower rate than the total consumer price, consumer inflation. Really, really interesting. It means that something happened last year, and what I'm about to show you is I think that word stagnation is interesting, because stagnation of an economy doesn't necessarily mean people slipped backwards. It just means there's a lot of not moving forward. And anytime you're not moving forward, things could change. And I think that's what we're seeing. So what are some of the big factors? Well, consider this, right? Consider that petrol started and ended the year at 21.50 a litre. But sitting inside there's this horrendous picture of 92 cents a litre up at the beginning of the year. And we're not like America. In America, when the price of petrol goes up 2 cents, people are like, oh my God, petrol went up 2 cents. In South Africa, we're like, way past that. It's like, wow, 1.20 rand, 95 cents, 32. But it started and ended the year at the same level. Here's the important thing, though. It's still 21.50 rand a litre. It costs a lot of money to run your motor car.
Yeah.
And I do think that, again, we have no idea what's going to happen now with the Straits of Hormuz closed and, war in the Middle East. It's already the stock markets, the world is seeing pretty radical shifts. So I'm not really sure what's going to happen. I don't see it getting better. Let's put it that way. If anything, it's going to be more expensive to get in your car and go somewhere. Yeah. And that's a big, big factor in South African life. What about the other important things, like putting food into your body to live? So here's some interesting things. The price of eggs, old joke, but what's the price of eggs? It actually went down last year. And the price of chicken actually stayed the same. So there's quite a lot of evidence that we're seeing from some of our partners in the corporate world. We had a really good chat with Old Mutual the other day, who do a lot of work in trying to understand big shifts in the economy. And they're saying that in their data, it looks like the bottom end of the market actually had an okay year. I mean, life is tough down there, but it was okay compared to other pieces of society or other pieces of that pyramid. So if the price of eggs is going down, chicken's going down, and that's what you're eating, you're okay, What about some of the other things? Because inside that 3.2% total inflation sits a much bigger story. So the big one, of course, was beef in particular. Okay, horrible.
Brandon, sorry to interject. What could have spiked the cost for beef?
So beef was very much it was a factor of a number of things, but the main thing was disease, right? I mean, we had a foot and mouth outbreak in South Africa, and supply just completely dropped. So the moment supply drops, obviously prices are going to go up. So this is not necessarily inflationary, but what it did was so the fact that beef is going up, and we eat a lot of beef in South Africa, beef and beef products, a lot of processed meat, the primary protein source for South Africa throughout the income pyramid. But the problem with beef going up was that it had a sort of a knock-on effect on everything else. So when you look at something like lamb chops, are one of our favorite sort of things. I think almost all South Africans like throwing things on a fire and burning them. Lamb chops are right up there. And lamb chops went up 13%. In fact, there were months when lamb chops went up considerably more. The price of lamb had like a 30% month-on-month spike at one stage. Wow. So lamb chops went through the roof, What about the more sort of important things, the stuff that brings us other types of nutrients? Vegetables as a total category was up 10.3%. That's a lot. That's huge. And inside of vegetables, there were other things that did crazy stuff. Tomatoes, at one stage, tomatoes went up 40% month on month. And so did onions. Everyone forgets about onions. Do you know that it takes 9 months to give birth to an onion? Onion farming it's a hard business, So the things like tomatoes and onions through the roof, And I don't know how many cooks we have on the call today or people interested in food, but if you add up all of that price on mince and tomatoes and onions, you end up with a very simple picture, which is like a really, really bad year for the spaghetti bolognese fans out there. It's like your spag bowl was probably costing you 25 to 30% more at the end of the year than it was at the beginning of the year. And in some ways, I think that spaghetti bolognese is kind of how I would define the majority of the consortium. It's a good analogy for that hardcore of the consumer class. These are people who don't necessarily have to rely on processed meats and on frozen chicken to keep the family fed. They can go the step further, but boy, were they hit hard. That's the feeling. They were hit hard in their wallets. At the same time, there's another group of people. I call them the fillet steak eaters. So this is the guys right at the top of that pyramid, right? The little 5%. And I don't know about you, but I certainly, the trips that I've made to Joburg and certainly down in Cape Town, I don't see like restaurants being hit hell of a hard in the last year, the kind of places where the fillet steak eaters will eat. These guys don't really care that much. If the fillet steak's $280 1 month and $295 and $300 the next, they just eat the fillet steak, smash back a bottle of wine and pay the bill, tip the waitress and walk out. So there's a group of people that it doesn't seem to have affected that much. So the question is, well, why would the fillet steak eaters be smiling? Well, here's why. So I've just shown you the back of the roller coaster. What happened at the front of the roller coaster? First of all, prime rate actually went down 1% year on year. So anybody on the call who's got a house bond, you'll know that you finished the year in a bit of a better place than you started it. Significant 1% doesn't sound like a lot, but it's quite a lot of money when you're borrowing a lot of money. So for anybody that could afford to borrow money, great year. Like it was good. I had more money in my back pocket. The Randela gained 12% of the US dollar. So this exchange rate thing, boy, we have no idea where it's going, right? I mean, like especially given the events in the Middle East, it could be horrible going forward. But the bottom line is, during the course of the year, it was really good news for people who want to do something like travel overseas. The last time I was overseas, I remember almost choking on a pizza because, it's like a pizza and a beer cost about the same as like the fanciest restaurant in South Africa. So a really good year for people who could travel, people who could travel and use their hard-earned money at the top of the pyramid. The JSE All Share Index added 38.5%. So massive commodity boom in South Africa last year. Platinum, gold through the roof. China and India and America is still buying quite a lot of our minerals. Incredibly good year for some people at the in the hardcore of the earners of South Africa. The top of that pyramid, pretty damn good year. Is there any evidence anywhere immediate? So those of you who have seen my presentations before will know that I'm quite obsessive about new passenger car sales. It's something I track year on year. I think it's a really good indicator of consumer sentiment. And last year, we sold 433,000 passenger cars. That is the most passenger cars we've sold since 2014 or 2015.
That is
Absolutely through the roof. 20% up on last year. And it continues. This trend continues. We're just selling more and more passenger cars.
Yeah. Just a quick one, Brandon. Would you say Chinese cars contributed a lot to this percentage? Because I know a lot of people were buying Chinese cars and were buying them.
Yeah, good question, and which I think it's a good question that a lot of people are asking. So here's the thing about the Chinese cars. Yes, we are selling a lot of Chinese cars now because 5 years ago, well, Chery came and then they went, and now they're back in. 4 years ago, there were no Chinese cars being sold. Right now, they're making up somewhere between 10 and 15% of total new car sales. We don't know the actual number because a lot of these Chinese guys aren't reporting it. The biggest winner in this whole system is actually Toyota. They're doing record sales. They haven't sold as many cars in decades. So I think what's happened in the Chinese, I think the effect of the Chinese cars is mainly that they have excited the market, number one. So, there's all these new cool cars with fancy big grills at the top because they've got like GPS and locators and cameras and stuff in the front. That's the main reason they need those big grills.
Cool features as well.
Yeah, super cool features, super high spec motor cars. So the story actually for me in the new car in the car sales is that the Chinese cars have arrived. They've excited the whole market again. Any pent up consumer demand coming out of COVID, if there was ever a time to buy a car, it feels like it's now. And the main reason is because boy, do you get bang for your buck out of a Chinese car. $500,000. Because the last thing I'll say on it is remember that Chinese cars are not cheap. The entry level Chery Tiggo is the same price as a VW Polo. So this isn't about cheap cars, but the point is you can buy R1 million worth of value in another mark for R500,000 in a Chinese car. The bang for buck is massive.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of it's probably one of the big sort of stories of the year, and we certainly see it coming out of the data that this idea of value. I've got money, but I'm just much more careful about how I spend it. And boy, do I want to extract value for my money. So bang for buck is pretty much it's a ubiquitous kind of consumer thought throughout that pyramid. Okay, so add all of this together and you get a pretty simple sort of picture. I think the guys at the front of that roller coaster, man, they're doing much better than the guys at the back. And there's one very simple little metric that we have in the data this year. We added a question, and we've tried this question before. It's a tough one to ask people about finances in general, but we asked it very simply. So on average, how much money do you manage to save or invest every month? And this is a comparison between the middle market, which is effectively that blue part of the pyramid, right? People earning between 10 and 40,000 in household income. And the gold bars, top 5%. Look at the radical discrepancy in the amount of investable income that exists between these two groups. So one of the things that we've been, one of the sort of theories we've been postulating, that the pyramid that I showed you earlier, that's the Gini coefficient at play. We are still the most unequal society in the world, and we're also the 35th biggest country in the world now. So what it means is this group of people that we're looking at, it's 14 million strong. There's a lot of people sitting in here, and it's almost like the Gini coefficient is now having an effect at the top of the pyramid, in isolation. So it's not that the rich are getting richer; it's that there are more people getting wealthier. It's just that the discrepancy between lifestyle and access to goods, services, products, and consumer choice is just starkly different.
Yeah. Brandon, do you perhaps know where exactly these people are investing?
So the difference between the middle market and the top end is that discretionary saving or investing money that you have allows you to access a slightly different kind of range of investments. So we see a much higher levels of RAs and pension funds, relatively higher. Some of the smaller categories, things like offshore investments, tax-free savings, that kind of stuff. That's very much top-end driven still. The mid-market, more likely to invest in things like burial schemes, funeral policies and burial schemes. There's quite a lot of stokvel still that goes down there. It's a very, very different investment portfolio. But part of being a member of the top end, you get the keys to the top end clubhouse, and all of a sudden, I can have a retirement annuity. So that's the story of South Africa, and I just think it's a really nice illustration. What I think is important is if you look at these numbers and you consider that 40% of those people in the middle market are saying that they end the month with less than $500 a month to invest in any way, manner, or form for their future, for their children, for whatever. It just means that the financial pressure that they sit on, even if they're very good at managing their money, it's just going to take small shifts to make big behavioral changes. And I kind of, I always makes me think of the famous camel's back analogy. How much straw does it take? And it literally just takes that one last little piece. And what we are seeing in the data is not necessarily that the camel's back was broken last year, but throughout the data, it looks like it's just starting to crack a little. And I'm calling it the 5% sort of phenomenon, because throughout the data, we'll see these crazy little 5% shifts. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot. If you've ever had a pre-diabetic diagnosis, you'll know that 5%, the difference between life and death. But 5%, the reason it's important in this, in the purpose of this presentation, just do the maths quickly. 14 million people, 10% is 1.4 million, 5% is 700,000 people. So if we see a 5% shift in the data, it potentially represents a change in behavior for 700,000 consumer class South Africans.
People.
Okay, so
people,
5% is meaningful. Okay, so how do we start trying to tell this story? And I should have disclaimed this and said, this is the first public kind of presentation of some of this thinking and some of what we're seeing. So I'm trying out a couple of things to see if they'll work, and to see if we can sort of keep people with the story. So the place I actually want to start here, that one of the things that we do as data analysts, as mathematicians, or mathletes, I think as we're now called, those of us or computer geeks, data geeks, let's just call ourselves data geeks. We very much look at the world as a continuum, and as human beings, I think we have this natural tendency to try and put stakes in the ground. We divide our calendar up by Christmas and New Year and Easter, and then we have birthdays, and we have our salary review moment where it's like, what? But actually, life is a continuum. Time is it's a conveyor belt, and that is actually what we're sitting on. And those of us who are interested in longitudinal views of the world and of society always look to see, what are the things people were thinking about doing, and if you can imagine, you're on this sort of conveyor belt of time, and you've got good intentions, or you've got intentions to do something. It doesn't take very much for something to change your mind. It's like the days when everybody smoked, and it's like, well, I'm going to give up smoking. And you think you say, I'm going to give up smoking for 10 years. And then suddenly something traumatic happens and you give up smoking. That's kind of what I think, or what we believe, looking at the data. That's the kind of picture we're looking at here, right? That what happened last year is, when spaghetti bolognese goes up 5%, it's okay. When it goes up 30%, it's just a year that makes you stop and go, whoa, hang on a moment. And if there are any red flags, it's these 5% red flags. Okay, so what are some of the stories in the data? Well, somebody, I think it might have been a teacher of mine at school, once said to me that trouble always begins with good intentions. And here's a little example. I've just picked a couple of good intentions. This is a longitudinal view of just 5 little things that people tick in the data. We asked this question: what are you likely to do this year to deal with the rising cost of living? And there's a whole barrage of things that people can tick. This isn't the full list. Interestingly, using loyalty programs is very, very high up here. Changing where I shop for groceries is very, very high up here. But these are just some interesting ones for me. So year on year, you'll see that there's just not a lot of shift in this good intention. And we've only asked this question the last 2 years. I would wager that if we'd asked this question for the last 5 years, we'd probably see very, very similar metrics. You know what I mean? If anything, they would have grown a little. But year on year, the intention to do things, it sort of stayed the same. cutting down on clothing and going out less. These are major consumer metrics, right? It's like I'm going out less. I'm going to stay at home. Why? Because thanks to COVID, my home, it's a castle. It's like, I can get everything I want delivered to me. I've got a nice TV set up. It's one of the big post-COVID things. It's like my home is actually a really nice place, and to get me to leave it, you got to offer me something really special, interesting. And then at the same time, we've got this idea of just cutting down on things, like cutting down on clothing. Again, a bit of a post-COVID moment. I always used to joke that COVID taught me that all I need to have good business meetings are like 3 kickaways that I can wear under the table where no one can see what I'm wearing. So I think that clothing definitely was something. Clothing expense was definitely a post-COVID thing. Okay, so those are the two at the top. The one in the middle, super interesting. 19% of people saying spend less on alcohol. Okay, so like just buy cheaper booze. Let's put it there. Which sounds horrible to me, but anyway, 20% of people tick that. And then these last two are kind of interesting. Cancel my gym membership. 10% of people. And the last one we didn't have in last year. We added it in this year. My colleague Jules thought it would be a good idea because she's an active mountain biker, and she was like interested in, in these expensive sports. What are people? 10% of people spending less on my sports or hobbies. It's quite significant.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's a bunch of good intentions. Yeah. Sorry, you're gonna ask, Melissa?
No. Yeah, I just wanted to ask. Would you say these are permanent behavioral changes, or is it short term?
Well, so that's what's interesting. They're short term until you act on them, right? So they're all on the continuum, and then there's a point you act on them, and then they become short term. It's like, spending less on alcohol. I guess you spend less on alcohol, and then when you earn a little bit more, when things ease up, you might start spending more.
So actually, because I was actually just focusing on the cancel my gym membership.
So canceling
I don't know how that would go now.
Well, we'll get to it. We'll get to that in a second. So let's look at these. For me, there are 3 things there are 3 areas here that are interesting. So, and I'm just going to focus on them. As I said, they're just 3 examples in the data this year of this 5% kind of issue. So let's start with the one in the middle, right? The spending less on alcohol. So spending less on alcohol is super interesting because we actually ask a couple of other different questions, and not everybody drinks alcohol. So if you just look at the drinkers of South Africa, people who do drink alcohol, that number goes up to 23%. So 23% of people who drink alcohol tick the box to say, I'm thinking of cutting costs this year by spending less on alcohol. Okay, that's a big number. Elsewhere in BrandMapp, we ask a question about your potential consumption habits in the coming year. Okay, and 2 of those options, it's where we ask things like becoming a vegetarian or eating less meat or, doing those kind of things. And one of the options that we give people is cutting back on how much I drink. And this is what the 5-year trend looks like for the percentage of people who said, I'm thinking of cutting back on how much I drink. So you'll see coming out of COVID, 21, 23, 28, 28. So we came out of COVID, everyone was still desperate to have a drink. And then it sort of rose up sort of gradually, and then last year we just see a little nudge down. To your point, is like, did something happen there? But you'll see that there's a lot of intention built into that. There's a lot of good intention built into that little trend for the last couple of years. In the same question, we also ask which people are likely to stop drinking completely, to give up alcohol, and that's what that looked like for the last 5 years. So again, that percentage has risen quite sharply. The question, the $1 million question is, okay, if you've got this good intention for the last 5 years, what happens in a year when suddenly, you're walking out of the bottle store and you're realizing, geez, man, that my case of beer is like properly expensive. Well, that's what happened. Mm-hmm. So look at how consistent. So this is the total percentage of people that we measure in the consumer class who do not drink alcohol. Look how consistent it was from 21 to 23. And I can tell you, going back literally as far as we've been doing BrandMapp, 10, 12 years worth of data, that number was always very, very consistent. Alcohol was a 75-25% kind of market. Little nudge up last year, and this year, boom, 5% shift. That is a 5% shift in a 100 billion rand industry in South Africa.
Yeah, that is quite a big number.
It's huge, there's so much built into this. Obviously, there's a Gen Z and a youth effect at play. There's no doubt that younger people, for a variety of reasons, we're still working on that thesis. It's probably worth a totally different webinar, like the whole sort of generational drinking. But the bottom line is 5% there. That's a lot of people who've stopped drinking.
Yeah, it's a lot of people. I myself don't drink, and personally, it has a lot of factors to it. We have financial pressures, your student debts, the rent is high. So a lot of factors quite contribute to that. So you always have to prioritize just before deciding on coughing up money and go and buy booze.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, and we'll be welcoming more people into this percentage. Hopefully next year it will be around 50% of people who are drinking.
Well, I mean, hopefully for society, clearly a very, very good thing. For the alcohol industry, not so good. And I think there's also, just as a sidebar, there's quite a lot of evidence out there at the moment, and we certainly see it in the percentage of people who also drink non-alcoholic. There's definitely a bit of an exploration about drinking habits, and the market is kind of adapting to it. There are actually, if you are a drinker, there's some pretty good low alc and non-alc and low cal options out there, even in beer. I think 10 years ago, the non-alcoholic segment was pretty boring. So the industry is at least responding, but I think you're right. I think they're going to have to respond even more, because I see that number potentially going up. Okay, let's move on to the ones at the bottom. Remember the bit about gym membership that you pointed out, and about giving up on about sports. So what happened in sports this year? So sports are really interesting. We measure sport in two different ways. We first say, what sports are you interested in watching or playing? So we capture participation and spectator. And then once you've selected those sports that you're interested in watching and playing, we say, okay, but which ones of them do you actually play? What's super interesting about this is year on year, we see the sports that people are interested in are almost identical. People are the same percentage of people last year that were interested in football, rugby, cricket, gym training, cycling, everything. Pretty flat. The only thing that's gone up, paddle, but that's again another story. Paddle has actually gone up quite significantly. So the level of interest that people have stayed the same. When it comes to what people are actually doing, the only places where we see everything being flat the three big ones are here: walking, hiking, and road running. The footprint of people who walk, road run, and hike stayed the same year on year. Anything else, though, that you have to get in your car to go and do, pretty much with the exception of paddle, which is is very much a top-end kind of pursuit at the moment. Anything else has actually dropped a little bit. So it feels like one of the things that we've been willing to sacrifice is a little bit of spending money, time, energy, and effort on getting off our couches. Not a very good thing for society. The thing that, for me, what the common factor here, all of these things are free, right? I mean, if you live in Cape Town, you're lucky enough to be within walking distance of the mountain, there is no cost associated. It doesn't cost a lot to road run. You just need a pair of shoes, and walking. It's probably the freest, easiest exercise you can get. So anything that comes without a cost, we see pretty flat. The overall effect on this, though, is super interesting, because in that question, obviously, once we've said which of these sports do you play, there is an option that says I don't play any sports. In other words, I don't do any of these things. And this is what the 5-year trend for that looks like. Look how incredibly consistent it's been. And then, boom, last year, 33%. 5%.
Not healthy at all. Not healthy.
700,000 South African consumer class South Africans potentially decided that last year was a year they were just going to not get off their asses. There's couch potatoes, There's so much that sits behind this. We're still trying to unpack what the possible reasons and effects are. There is one category that showed, out of the actual participation, that showed a pretty radical decline. And if you've been reading any of the social streams about some of the negative feeling about one of the country's biggest gym chains, we won't mention any names, but it feels to me like gym training, that's participation. So the level of interest in gym stayed the same year on year. The number of people saying I'm actually doing gym dropped quite dramatically. I think there's so much around there that's obvious. One of those things is that canceling a gym membership is a really, really easy and quick way to save quite a lot of money.
Yeah.
You can cancel.
Yeah. And also just the logistics. I mean, to get to a gym, you have to pour petrol. Petrol on its own, it has skyrocketed. So it's
Absolutely.
there's a lot of factors that would lead one to canceling their gym membership.
Absolutely. And I think, obviously you can start up again anytime you want, or you can find an alternative. But I think in the general picture here is kind of interesting. So it just goes that, exercising, spending money on doing those things in a year when things are tight. There's so many other factors that could be coming into play here. Just time alone, when you think about it, it's like in a tough year when I've got to work more, I've got to spend more time with my sort of recreational time. I'm going to spend more with my family, with doing things that are cool with me. Taking an afternoon off to go and ride my mountain bike. It's like potentially, if there was a year when the straw was going to break the exercising camel's back, it looks like last year was that year. So pretty big shift. Right? There's a 5% shift. Let's talk about the first two, though. They are super important, I think. The first two are directly related to consumer behavior. Okay, this idea of going out less, spending less money on clothing, changing where I shop for groceries, those kind of things. So just two little insights about that. The first one is that this sort of phenomenon of grocery delivery and delivery in general, you can see the story here. This is the longitudinal story for the last 5 years about the impact of same-day grocery delivery services. Remember that prior to 2021, the answer, the don't use any would have been basically 100% because there was just pick and pay bottles, I think. So this is a radical shift and a radical trend in consumer behavior. When you see slopes like this, that's not normal in research. It's just an incredible rise to ubiquity. Last year on this exact webinar, I said, I think next year might be the first year. Well, I'll be able to make the statement that if you walk into a consumer class home in South Africa, you are more likely than not to find people who are using same-day grocery delivery services at least once a month, and this is the year. Okay, so 51% of all. The bottom line here is that, geez, man, those blue motorbikes, they've never been busier, hey? And it's not just... they're everywhere.
Yeah, they're literally
everywhere. And it's not just them, it's the courier services, it's the take-a-lots, our lives have just changed dramatically as consumers, and you really don't have to leave your door very much. And you can also do beautiful things like comparative shopping to get the best deal in the palm of your hand. Where do we see a really big effect? Well, look at this graph. So just have a look at that quickly, and everyone on the call, try and imagine what could that be? Again, it's the percentages, they're quite low. They look like little numbers, but again, it's a 5% shift in both areas. Okay, what you're looking at is a chart that shows the percentage of adults who said, I don't regularly visit any shopping malls. And I've just picked on Gauteng in the Western Cape here. In general, people in Gauteng, it's very much more of a mall culture than the Western Cape anyway. We've always tracked it like that. But a 5% shift in people saying, I don't regularly go and visit shopping malls is quite hectic. Think about the footfall numbers. And we, in the last month when we've shared some of this thinking with our retail clients and some of the corporates that we work with, everybody's kind of nodding their heads and going, yeah, we see it and we know it, It sort of brings us to, it's kind of a link to a slightly bigger thought, because hidden in here is another picture. And those of you who use the data can go and do the math. If you look at the average number of malls visited by people, that's the change that we see year on year. Okay, so last year, it's relatively huge, right? Basically, last year we were saying that the average Gauteng consumer had a repertoire of 7 different malls 6.8 malls that they were visiting. Last year, that dropped down to, in the Western Cape, 3.2 to 2.4. That's a significant change in consumer behavior. And I can only believe it's about mobility. It's about how much it costs me to get in my car and drive to the damn mall. So the biggest shift that we see is actually in Gauteng, where, for example, we used to see a lot of people in the Tshwane area who would be driving down to Mall of Africa or even Sandton City. They're not doing that nearly as much anymore. They're sticking up there with Centurion Mall and Mellon Mall and stuff. And the same thing in the Western Cape. There were a lot of people who would regularly go through to the V&A waterfront or Canal Walk. And if you're living in the outlying areas, you're just not going to do it. It's not regularly anyway. It'll be a special occasion.
Yeah.
So these are pretty big shifts. So these are it's meaningful. These are big numbers, big footfall, and it's not a threat. It's just it's a reality. It may well change, things may well shift, but right now this is kind of what's going on in consumers' minds. And this idea of sort of thinking repertoire, it makes me think of this picture. It's like if you can imagine what happens in this environment that we're trying to describe. I always think about it I like burgernomics. If you're sitting there going like, or like, do I really need the deluxe burger with the bacon and the cheese and all the trimmings, or can I just get a cheeseburger? Or actually, this month maybe I'm just going to get the burger. You can still afford the burger. It's just you're going to be a lot more considerate. So we think what's happened is a lot more intentional shopping going on. That's the word I'm trying to use to describe it. It's an intentionality that sits behind consumer behavior. People are a little bit more considered. If you're marketing brands and services and products, you've got to entice people a little bit more to spend that extra bit more. So it's a year when we, as shoppers, we really started doing our homework a lot more. And one of the places, probably the best example, I love the grocery, the grocery retailer category. It's always fun to go and explore. And we delve into it quite deeply. For the last couple of years, obviously, we've seen Checkers, having they've won the war, or they've won a few battles in the war. What happened in the last year on year? So this is the first question we ask: where do you shop most often for groceries? And you'll see that the picture actually stayed relatively similar, right? So most often shopped, not much of a change. If there is, it's the Checkers is finally eating its younger brothers, or it's not its younger brothers, its siblings' lunch a little bit. I think that's because there's always been quite a big crossover between ShopRite and Checkers, shopper-wise, and there's lots of factors. It's not a massive shift, but it's the only shift we see in the most often shopped. But then we ask a question: where else do you shop? And there's a really interesting little nuance in this, because we know that the average shopper used to shop at like 3.1 or 3.2 different grocery retailers anyway. It's generally speaking, wherever you find one, you'll find another, especially in the mall environment. And this is a really interesting little picture here. It's kind of another one of those flags. It's like a little 5, or in this case, like a 6% flag in Spar's case. What this says to me is that last year was a year when, as shoppers, we just started doing our homework a little bit better and started realizing that there are different places you can go to get the deal that you want. Just means we're shopping around a little bit more. And I do think like the app environment has made a big difference to that. I certainly know quite a lot of people who will shop at, using 3 different shopping apps almost at once, getting the best deal from here and the best deal from there and the best deal from there. So at the same time as we've become more selective about the actual products we buy in a behavior like this, it's almost the opposite, right? It's the opposite, but it's for the same reason. We are shopping at more places for groceries because we're going to very specific places for very specific things. It's kind of what it says to me. Yeah. The last little piece I want to show you on shopping is this one. So this is, once we've said where do you shop most often, we then say why do you shop there most often, and this is the total picture. So this is looking at the total average consumer. What are the drivers? Really interesting. We don't see a lot of shifts in here year on year, and the main thing we've seen is that convenient location has been becoming less importance as that delivery service has risen up. Last year things changed radically though. That is a massive shift in most convenient location being much more important to me. So it speaks to what you're saying.
It makes much sense because a lot of things are put into consideration as well. So you wouldn't want to go to travel for a long distance, considering the fact that petrol is high. So you would want to go to the nearest. Quality doesn't even matter at some point because you just want to prioritize. Yeah, honestly speaking, just want convenient location.
I think you speak for, well, clearly you speak for the majority of people. It's and then obviously prices. In a year like last year, prices are going to be relatively more important. And then the big one, loyalty as well. We're about to publish together with Truth Loyalty, our annual white paper on loyalty, and it's really interesting. But we think that loyalty, it's just becoming increasingly important for a lot of people as a way of potentially saving money. So that's kind of there's a little overview of what's been happening. If I was to sort of not summarize, but if I was to throw a final thought into this, this is the best way I can think of describing the sort of the phenomenon that's in my head. This continuum, this conveyor belt of time, and the effects that we see in the consumer market. We are a youthifying society. There's the percentage of young people in South Africa. Our average age, we're right up there with some of the leading youngest countries in the world. And the consumer class, even though it didn't grow very much last year, there is a general youthification. And I think it's kind of important to remember that what I've got up on the screen there, that, you look at older generations, geez, these people have changed the way they behave. Well, it's because they're just getting older. Okay. And the new habits of those generations are just the old habits of the ones before. So for those of you who do use the data and cross tab it, I really encourage you to always put that generational view on. We actually have generations now as a drop down, as a pre-select in the data. And you can go and have a look at the generational view of this world and try and imagine what those under 35s are going to look like for the next 5 years, because there are some huge changes in their behavior, especially in media, interestingly enough, which is the next presentation we'll be doing. We just see some pretty big shifts. So that's sort of how to understand this. It's not a paradigm shift in society. It's the net result of a whole lot of good intentions, a whole lot of generational shifts. I'm going to finish off with something which is, it wouldn't be, these days, I think you get banned from doing any conference speech or any webinar if you don't first talk about Chinese cars, and then you've got to say something about the AI monster, the monster in the room. Yes. So, yep, the AI monster. So there's so much we can talk about with AI. I mean, you guys are right in the middle of it, right? Having launched an amazing new sort of set of tools that are all based on an AI interface. In our world of data, it's becoming increasingly sort of just commonplace. You have to use it because it's kind of like having a really, really clever person in the room. No, it doesn't matter how clever you are. This guy, he thinks the stuff you don't. And we thought this year we're going to put in a couple of very specific questions just to see where AI fits in. So the first one, I've just got 3 slides to show you to finish off with. We have asked this question always in BrandMapp, like, what keeps South African consumer class adults awake at night? And this is an edited list. There's obviously a whole lot of other things, but I just took some at the bottom and some at the top. The things at the top have stayed the same always. We are a country we have to be concerned with crime and corruption and rising food costs and government incompetence. It's like, that is unfortunately the traumatized society that we live in. But I'm always interested in how small these things are at the bottom. I mean, look at global political tension and nuclear war. I think if we ask that question today, we might get a few more people ticking the box,
definitely.
Missiles flying over the car. But look where the rise of artificial intelligence sits. It's super low. Only 15% of people. And that number just hasn't risen dramatically over the last couple of years. Over the 4-year trend, I think it's like 10%, 11%, 12%, 14%. So it is becoming more of an issue, but it still sits relatively low, which makes me think that people just haven't watched enough of the videos on YouTube from like the godfathers of AI, the people who actually made this. Because I do think that in so many ways, in potentially frightening ways, like jobs and employment, there are some frightening things that are going to happen. On the other side of the equation, there are like really important business imperatives that need to be considered. Like, this is not something that we can be complacent about. And what are some of those effects? Well, we asked this question: what have you actually used AI tools for? And how's that for a result? So 3 years ago, these things didn't really exist. And we now show 80% of of all consumer class adults using AI tools in some way, manner, or form. If you add a generational filter onto that, 90% of Gen Zs are saying that they have used it. So this is like, and I mean, 10% different. Everyone's using AI tools. It's hard not to research, because if you're using Google, you're already defaulting basically to the AI tool. I thought this was it's just really kind of interesting and fun research. Look at writing and work tasks, so potentially this tool that has come in, and here's the important thing, uh, you know, internet access in South Africa, data access is definitely more accessible than ever before right now. There are some of these programs in Alan Knott Craig's program in the townships delivering like 100 meg unlimited broadband access for R5 a day. I think data access is something that we don't get enough credit for as a country, that we're slowly solving that problem. And AI, if you can access the internet, you've got AI, So what an amazing productive tool it could be.
Yeah.
The second question you asked,
our careers fully depend on AI. I can only imagine if it were to go down the entire day. A lot of us are going to struggle. I'm not going to lie.
Absolutely. Who's going to help me write my
Especially
report?
at work. Imagine now having to do something that has the deadline and the AI is down. It was going to be a whole entire movie.
Absolutely. So to that point, the last question we asked was this one. What's true, and which of these things are true when it comes to AI? So we're just trying to measure some kind of sentiment, and I think this is really interesting, because the stuff at the top is basically positive. The stuff at the bottom is the negative stuff. I don't like the idea at all. Only 9% of people. I don't really trust the answers from AI. 11% of people. I mean, maybe they just haven't used it enough to understand what's going on in there, that sometimes the thing hallucinates. But in general, incredibly positive. We are very, very positive as a nation about AI. The one I just want to focus in on, which I think is really fascinating, that 33% of people saying AI makes me more creative or productive. There's a difference, remember, between using AI to create and using it to help your creativity or productivity. And I speak as a case study of one, because by trade, I'm a writer and a photographer. Give me a camera, give me a microphone, give me a piece of paper and a pen. Happy. I don't actually need AI's help, but I can't draw to save my life. I'm terrible at drawing. And this entire presentation, obviously, all of these beautiful graphic novel style cartoons that we've been showing you, I told AI what the vision was in my head. And my friend Alan, I call everybody that annoys me Alan, my friend Alan, my AI interface, he just knocks these things out relatively well in no time at all. So I would tick that box to say, right now, AI is making considerably more creative. And the last thing I want to say about AI, it's just my last thought. If everybody's worried about, I think there's a general idea that we don't have to worry too much about it as humans, because AI is just not going to replace us as humans, and it won't. But it's very important that we understand as businesses some of the implications of what happens when this thing starts becoming superhuman-like.
Yeah.
We went to a really fascinating conference last week in Joburg, the Pulse Leadership and Marketing Conference, and there was a warning from Seth Godin, who's one of the sort of global writers. He's a bit of a thought guru kind of guy. He said his best advice that he's giving people right now about AI is, with you and your loved ones, make sure that you have a safe word, because you're going to be getting a call from somebody you love quite soon. It's going to sound exactly like them. They're going to be interacting with you. You're not going to be able to tell it's not them. And they're going to ask you to do something or ask you for money. And you're going to do it because you believe it's them. So have a safe word, so that at some point you can just go, Mom, by the way, what was your first dog's name? So I think, and it's a really interesting, and from a corporate perspective, like, your corporate image management, all of those things. So the question is, like, how far are we from it? And that's why I just want to show you in the blue. Hey, I was in the music industry for about 12 years of my life. And I promise you, if this particular song, just go and those of you on the call, if you've got a minute or two, just go and type Indie Blue Through My Soul into YouTube and listen to this video, listen to this song on headphones. 100% AI generated. And I promise you, if that person walked into my office as the head of A&R for a little record label in Cape Town, I would have signed her on the spot. It's beautiful production. It's very, very hard to tell that it's not real. So I think that's kind of like the big, if there is a frightened moment about AI, it's that. Let me summarize it all. We actually managed to sneak in on time. I'll summarize it all with this. The first thing I'll say about AI is, I'm amazed that it can help me do this kind of thing. But as my colleague Ashley pointed out the other day in a meeting, she said, there are still some problems. In this case, who's holding the picture? Well, I mean, it's either that guy with the light blue shirt's got the longest arm in the history of the world, or there's a fifth person in the roller coaster, So it's not everything it's cracked up to be. Let me reverse and just summarize, try and give you sort of a presentation summary here. I think what's important is roller coaster rides, they do end eventually. The good news, if there's anything built into this whole thing, is that it might just be a blip in time. That 2025 was a really bad year. The Treasury Department and the South African government are very bullish about the coming year. They think we're going to get back to like double-digit growths in the consumer class and the top end. So there is hope. What happens, what the rollout effect on the roller coaster ride is of missiles flying over it, we don't know yet. What's important is that what I've just shown you right now and what you can access in the BrandMapp data is a view right now of where the consumer sits. And I think that's super important to know when you're strategizing for the coming year.
Thank you so much, Brandon, for this insightful webinar. And thank you so much to everyone attending. A special thank you to the Wi-Fi team. Just a reminder that this recording will be shared with everyone and can also be accessed on our TelmarHelixa YouTube channel. Just a reminder that the latest BrandMapp is available on our new platform, Explore. So please do visit our website, www.telmarhelixa.com, and register for the upcoming training sessions. Thank you so much. See you on the next one.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Kotatso.
Thank you. Bye.